Okay, so I'm very excited to introduce our guest today, Nick Boileau. He's a researcher at ONCAT who's completed over 50 interviews with students as part of a longitudinal study ONCAT is conducting. Nick studies student decision making, and he's been with us since January 22. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Nick. Welcome.
Great, thanks so much, Meryl. So thank you all for attending today. It's exciting to see so many of you here. I'm going to start up my presentation, share this screen, and we'll hop in. All right, can I get some thumbs up or verbal yeses that we can see my shared screen? Yeah, great.
You're good.
Okay. So yeah, the title of this presentation is the the title of the presentation that I have is the Transfer Student Experience, a Longitudinal Qualitative Study. I think I gave a different one to Meryl for the plug there, so apologies if there's a difference. We're talking about the same topic though. So to get into a little bit about this. So first is that ONCAT, or organization, has been regularly collecting data on Ontario transfer students' experiences and decision-making since 2015, with a pause during the beginning of the pandemic. And our most recent project of this type, sorry, just moving something out of the way, is a longitudinal mixed method study. It has 3 stages. I'm going to talk about the first 2 because we're kind of partway through the second at the moment. So the first is talking with prospective Ontario transfer students about their decision making, their decisions in particular about whether to transfer and where to transfer. And then stage 2 tries to understand their actual application for transfer credit, what that process looked like roughly from when they applied to an institution to when they have their final credit assessment. So to give a sense of where these participants are from, so what we have is paired with this, there's a larger survey that we're conducting. And the survey questionnaire was assigned to a random sample of people that visited our website on transfer.ca, with which I believe many of you are familiar. And at the end of that survey, they were asked if they would like to participate in a follow-up interview. So some people opted into that, and then I emailed those individuals. I got a batch of email addresses each month, and about 6% of them responded to participate in an interview. And this resulted in 51 participants in the sample from the first stage. So so for the first stage, I have recently written a blog post that we put out and that I can provide a link to after if people are interested in a little more detail than I'll share today. But in that blog post, I make the claim that transfer students, by and large, have 3 positive characteristics that I want to highlight and have found in this data. One of those is that I've found them to be ambitious, I've found them to be strategic, and I found them to be resourceful. And so in this presentation, in the first part of the presentation, I'll take you through some of the things that lead me to make these claims. So in terms of their ambition, I've learned that prospective transfer students are ambitious in both their career goals and their educational aspirations. So in particular, they displayed interest in a variety of competitive and in-demand fields, such as software fields and social work. And I found that they've been interested in at least one of the 2. Generally, students will fall into one of these 2 camps where they have interest in gaining a deep understanding of the subject matter through undergraduate and, in fact, graduate studies, and or that they are interested in understanding their subject matter in a way that they could apply to their subsequent work context. In terms of them being strategic, I've learned that a prospective transfer student may consider several factors when deciding whether and where to transfer. In particular, they consider a myriad of costs, which include financial costs of education offset by transfer credit, unsurprisingly, and also the financial cost of living away from family. So that is part of the reason why some folks are interested in living close to where they're going to school, close to where their parents live. I've also learned that they think quite carefully about a variety of job market returns on their educational investments. So those include the number of job opportunities that might be available to them upon transferring, the probability of getting a job in the field to which they are transferring or which they were previously in, but changing institutions now, in the level of income that they might acquire, and in access to an industry that they wouldn't have access to with their current credential that they're pursuing. I've also learned that reasons for transferring depend on the type of transfer that students are into, here referring to, say, college to university or university to university. So more specifically, I've learned that college to university students are very interested in labor market outcomes and choose institutions on the basis of what they can foresee as the labor market outcome of the given program or institution or type of credential that they're pursuing. Also that there are cultural expectations around bachelor's and or university degrees. So as we know that degrees are being offered by colleges, this differs somewhat by the institution in college, whether it's precisely that they study at a university or just that they obtain a degree as opposed to a diploma or advanced diploma. And some are strategic from the outset in going from college to university because the average cost per year of a college is lower than for a university. So when they can expect that there's a pathway that would make the whole package more cost efficient, they might choose to go out of high school into a college and subsequently into a university for cost savings. For university to university, people mentioned mental health issues that they were experiencing at their initial institution, available mental health supports or their perception thereof, campus climate and safety, and the diversity of student population. The particular case that I talked with one participant about in depth had to do with the number of students of color that were on campus, and saying that for her as a student, it was a preference of hers to be at an institution where more people looked like her, and that the institution she was at was not the case. For university to college transfer, mental health issues were mentioned again, with some hope in this case that the college context would be a better fit for them for various reasons that we could talk about if you like. Some of them were strategic in noticing that they had study skills that they needed to develop. And some of them wanted to figure out what they wanted to study. In both cases, they had deemed that college would be a good place for them to do so. And some of these students had planned to subsequently go back and complete a university degree. So it's not simply a transfer from university to college, but some of them university to college, then back to university afterwards. And last, we have college to college transfers, and most of this seemed to be a desire to shift in careers through short-term credentials for career shifts. So that a diploma or an advanced diploma would be quicker to obtain than a degree in their desired field. They had found jobs for which that would be the right credential, and so that was the efficient route to the labor market and the new field of desire. Last, I learned that prospective transfer students may consult several sources of information, and this is what I mean by saying that they're resourceful. Those include institutional resources, or what I'm calling institutional resources, which include websites, guidance counselors, admission staff, transfer advisors, and faculty, as well as our website on transfer. And that they also rely quite heavily on social resources. So those include social media, in particular Reddit, which is a thing that we'll come back to in a bit, where I get into some conversation with you all about what the implications for this are for the work that you do. almost all but one, I think, of my participants named that they went on Reddit. It was the most popular place to go for information on post-secondary. Um, but their social resources also include networks of students and people in their industry, as well as family and friends. It was very interesting to learn how students were networking in order to gain the information that they were seeking to gain. They would sometimes go 2, 3 levels into their friend networks to learn about somebody who had attended their program at their institution of choice, to learn about things from campus climate to the rigor of the studies to um, uh, um, uh, connections in the labor market and likelihood of employment after graduation. So they made heavy use and very strategic use of their social resources. Last, I've learned that a prospective student may consult. Oh, sorry. There was a typo on that slide. They also engage in these sources of information in two main ways that are kind of complements of each other. So some engage passively, and the idea here is that they would mainly be reading information. This could be on institutional websites, but it can also be in their use of social media. So watching YouTube videos, reading what was available already on Reddit. But some, in addition to that, would also ask lots of questions. And this is what I'm referring to by active engagement. So they might post questions on Reddit, they might engage in conversations, they might write their own posts in order to have conversations on Facebook pages and YouTube videos and so on and so forth. And then also an interesting finding that's related to the notion that they rely heavily on social media and their social resources more broadly is that students differed in the amount of trust that they gave to those social resources. So in particular, something that was interesting is that as an example of their uses of Reddit, they would go to Reddit to learn about students' experiences transferring from one institution to another, admission requirements, information on transfer in Ontario, quality of instruction in their receiving program, industry connections, labor market outcomes, and campus climate. And some of them would take this as sufficient to make their decisions. So some of them would check this against institutional resources. They would relay that that's where they go to social resources for their initial hypotheses, and then they feel that they need to speak with an advisor or they need to check it out on a website, double check the information on a website. But some of them would relay that this was all that they were looking at, and they trusted these testimonials of what these places were like and what the programs were like, and that would be sufficient. So in terms of our engagement, the way I'm going to do this is not as just a straight kind of presentation of work and then a Q&A session, but instead what I'm interested in doing is thinking about the implications for practice, for the implications that you do from this work. And the way that I engage in this type of work and that I like engaging in this type of work is to realize that you all engage in this work all the time and have lots of relevant knowledge to bring to thinking about what these potential implications are. And so I'm going to ask a few questions, some of them related to potential recommendations that I could think of making. And then there'll be places for you to go into breakout rooms and answer these amongst your groups in a polling tool that I'll show you in a moment. So the first is this idea that Reddit was used by almost every prospective transfer student and that I interviewed and seen as sufficient by some of them. So the question that I have is how could an institution engage prospective transfer students who are on Reddit and might rely almost exclusively on Reddit for their sources of information? By an institution here, I don't just mean from a policy perspective, I mean in terms of your practice as individuals as well. And so we're going to go into breakout rooms, but before we do, if you could scan this QR code or go to slido.com and then enter this number, you'll have the ability to enter answers into here. And I'm going to sit back in this room and see them as they come in. We're going to be gone for 4 minutes, and then we're going to come back and talk about another finding and potential recommendation. So this was wonderful. Thank you all so much for participating in this. I used to work with in K-12 settings with teachers and engage similarly with them, understanding their expertise and seeing how they could see research as relevant to their practice. And I'm always so delighted by the number of ideas that people bring to this that I would have never thought of, kind of like proof of concept that this is a really valuable activity. So to summarize, there are a number of things in here, but some interesting suggestions came up around that you could play the role of a student. You could go in with an institutional account, in fact, engaging them there, but you could also recruit students who might be advocates for your institution to engage other students there. That you could host an Ask Me Anything session. There are a number of other suggestions here. And I can talk with Meryl afterwards about trying to create a summary of this, but I think this is really, really valuable information that we're sharing here, because this is the reality of the practice of students, and so thinking actively about how can we adapt our practices to that reality is a really productive activity, and I appreciate all your participation in this. So to come to another finding here and suggestion that I have based on some research in our decision-making space, that's the main topic of my research, that again is really not meant to just state, but meant for you to think about with me, to think about what it would look like to do something like this, whether it feels like a good idea to you. Is that we've learned, as I stated previously, that students base their decisions to transfer on various factors. Those factors differ a lot between individuals. You could broadly characterize them as one might, from a research perspective, into individual factors, so like career goals of an individual, but there are also a number of social factors, and those include familial and cultural expectations. From this diversity, another thing about my background is I used to be a high school teacher myself. So when I think about the fact that we're trying to help people in attaining some goal, that that we need to understand that students are coming to us with different types of knowledge, different types of goals, even for them being in this place. In your case, trying to learn about the potential of transfer. And so what I recommend on this is something that Hilary Holmes had mentioned in a previous Lunch and Learn session, where she talked about developmental versus prescriptive approaches to advising, and that distinction is mainly between whether you would kind of tell all students something relatively similar in terms of what they should do, or whether that recommendation should be tailored in some way to the individual, understanding that there would be some potential redundancy for students who have a lot of knowledge that you might want to relay, and that you could start from there instead with the limited time that you have. And that we also wouldn't want to make assumptions about things that would be part of one's decision making that aren't fair assumptions for a given individual. And so when I engaged in these interviews, I asked questions like these that I think are good ones to ask when we start conversations with students, asking them about their educational and career goals, asking them about the programs they're considering transferring into, and what they see as cost and benefits of each of those options. When you have that conversation with students, they lay out kind of a myriad of factors. And when you look at that across individuals, like I was noting, that changes considerably. And so there's this notion of like a particular way that you might help students or help individuals change behavior on an individual basis, or even on a more macro scale, which is this idea of nudging. And what you'd be doing in this case, if you took this approach, is nudging them towards what you believe is a good goal, a good academic path for them, based on the goals and values and express constraints that they relay. Those could be financial restrictions. Those could again be familial or cultural expectations that we need to take seriously. So as an example that I put here is, what you could be faced with is a student who who believes, sorry. For example, when it seems that a student might benefit from transferring to a college, from a university to a college, but they are only considering other universities than the one that they're in. Nudging them could include trying to highlight the value of college education. Now, it could be a particular college if you're working on a receiving institution at a college, and it could be when you're actually supporting students in leaving. They're coming to you asking, where could I go next given these things going on in my life? It could be more broad than just a particular college education. The point here is that, if there's a strong reason, a strongly held belief that university education is the way to go, then a suggestion that they really should go to this program wouldn't be one that would be so easy to relay. Just simply revoicing that to the people whose expectations they care about might not be fruit for conversation. But what we could instead do is try to increase the amount of knowledge they have around college, knowing that through this discussion, they might not have sufficient knowledge to really defend that choice if they agreed with you that it seemed like a good one. And so the question that I have is around, from your perspective, the usefulness and the feasibility of the idea of nudging towards making college choices that in an initial college or university choices and in an initial conversation with the student, they aren't considering, but from your professional opinion, you think would be useful. So this is actually the same number and QR code. So if you have it open on your phone already, as I go through these slides, the new question will pop up. So we're going to go into breakout groups again. And yeah, just anything that you have, any thinking that you'd like to share around this idea that when you learn a lot about a student, you might have recommendations that seem not within the wheelhouse of what they're thinking about. How do you help them make that move? Um, so let's go into the breakout groups. So this was really great as well. So one thing that, the reason that the useful question here is knowing the extent to which this is currently common practice or not, whether broadly this notion of prescriptive advising versus developmental advising, but more so like what are the techniques used to work developmentally with a student. So things that I'm reading that are in here is that it seems like the general practice of nudging or working developmentally with students is common, and that's great to hear. Also, there are suggestions in here for how one would go about doing this that I can, aggregate and look across that are really useful. And then another thing that I'm seeing is that there was a request for general nudging questions that could be asked across the sector. I think that's a great idea too, that I think a lot about people who are early in the positions that you're in. There are lots of people who are new to the profession of transfer advising or recruitment and whatnot, and thinking of what are kind of these like smaller subset of questions of practices that one could learn early in their career before they gain the level of expertise to handle the nuances that some of you more experienced practitioners engage in. This is great for all of that. So the last part that we'll have time to get to in the presentation here is just sharing a little bit of what we're finding through the transfer application stage. So the interviews around the transfer application stage and the transfer process. So these are ongoing interviews. And so some of what we'll share here is a little bit about what I'm finding and what that could mean for practice. And then we'll also, if there's time, have space to say what are some other things you'd be interested in learning because these interviews are ongoing. So based on the interviews that I've had so far about applying for transfer credit, I observed the following amongst other things that seemed potentially worth noting. So there was some variation in whether and how they were told they can apply for transfer credit. So some students did not seem aware until fairly late in their process, sometimes after enrolling, that they were eligible for transfer credit. And some people seemed very aware of this. They were engaging with institutions to get pre-assessments even before they decided where to transfer. So there seems to be diversity in this. There's also some variation in when students receive their transfer credit. So there's before applying, when offered admission, after acceptance, and some of them after enrollment. Although in talking with some colleagues here, it seems like the last category is just really after acceptance. Is just depending on the size of the institution and when information is given to them. Sometimes they could only receive that information some time into the term. We also see some variation in whether students receive justifications for their assessment. So lots of students note that they just are told what transfer credits they will receive. Some of them get information about what the equivalent course was, and that serves as some form of justification. And some of them are left with lots of questions about why they didn't get certain credits that upon their assessment they really thought would transfer, certain credits they thought would transfer. Now, that relates to the last one here, is this feeling that they could challenge their initial transfer credit evaluation. This one for me felt like something a little more novel in what I was finding. Some of the earlier stuff might feel very familiar to people in your roles. This is from the side of the student. There seem to be differences from individual characteristics and including some cultural dispositions towards whether or not people in their position can ask for time from people in faculty positions or advisor positions. And this notion that what they're getting is information from an authority. So it's interesting for me to think about that dynamic, is to say that, you know, some students really advocate for themselves when they don't get the credit that they think they deserve and end up getting more credit than their initial assessment gave them. And there are some students that wouldn't start that conversation because of the fact that they just don't deem that to be something that they could do. They're not optimistic that an institution would listen to their individual case. And so that last point in particular obviously has some implications for practice, but all of them do potentially. So to share a couple of things on that, there's this notion that, you know, there need to be ways that we let students know that their prior PSE can be counted towards transfer credit. This is not to say this is not done. Again, the finding is that they do provide this information, but the way it's provided varies quite a lot, and the timing of that information being provided varies quite a lot. And so part of what I wanted to hear from you all about, and the second one, sorry, is whether that process, what that process looks like. Some of them have less information on this. In particular, it seems when that process is automated, they just kind of get the result. They don't know from the time they apply what that transfer credit application process looks like. So the question here is,
Nick, I don't think we'll have time to break out again because it's 12:57, but if
oh,
people want
got
to
you, got you.
just fill
Yeah,
in the Slido here.
you can feel free to fill in the Slido here.
Okay.
Yeah. So uh, the last Slido is around this recommendations to let students know they can apply for transfer credit and describe the process. So what would a useful version of that be? What is the set of recommendations that you could imagine somebody early in your career or institutions that you work at could learn, such that they are better meeting the needs of students who don't have much information coming in about what the transfer credit application process looks like, or whether or not they can even get transfer credit for their prior education? So Meryl, I'll hand it over and I'll stop sharing. I will be looking at these, so please feel free to fill them in, but I'll let the session close here.
Okay, yeah, sorry to cut things short. I know there's so much to say, and I think if anything, this suggests that we should do another like part, because I think there's more information, Nick, that would be helpful to share and also get feedback on, particularly with the second or third phase of this study. I don't know if you wanted to just kind of quickly, actually, no, probably not a good idea. Sorry, it is 12:59. Okay, so I will close it here. Thanks everyone so much for coming. I just wanted to let you know that next month we'll be joined by two people from Northern Institutions, Natalie Poulin-Leu from College Boreal and Michelle Boilio from Lakehead University, and they'll be talking about how they created an exciting new Northern Student Mobility Initiative between the 4 universities and 6 colleges that are in Northern Ontario. And this initiative is known as the Business Fundamentals Integrated Pathway. And that presentation will be moderated by Carolyn Poplak, our manager of sector engagement. So please keep an eye out for that email to register. And I will also pop in the link to our newsletter, because I think some of you may or may not have access to that. So I just wanted to make that available to everyone. And yeah, please feel free to reach out to either Nick or myself if you have any feedback on the presentation. We are always want to hear from you and hear about what else you'd like to learn about, or how you think you can help us, shape our research. So thank you so much. Nick, why don't you put your email in the chat if you can, for anyone who would like to reach out to you and have questions. Enjoy your lunch and the rest of your day. We'll see you next month. Bye. Thank you.